As you can see, I'm currently in Photoshop and I have the same exact file open in Illustrator. And what I want to do here is discuss the difference between working with rasters, also known as pixels, and vectors, the lines that you draw in Illustrator. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is I'm going to stay in Photoshop and I'm going to zoom in pretty close on this elf's head. And I'm going to go even further into her eye area. And as you can see, we're starting to get a lot of distortion here. We're getting these little jaggy things. These are the actual pixels that you're looking at now. Each box represents a color. And as you see, we are able to pretty much not tell that this is an eye anymore. And that is one of the main differences between using Illustrator and Photoshop. Because when you're dealing with pixels, you're dealing with boxes. And when you're dealing with Illustrator, you're dealing with lines. Let me zoom out again. I'm going to go to my desktop real fast and show you something else. I saved this version of the character in the PSD format, which stands for Photoshop document. And as we can see, the file size is 2.1 megabytes. The same file in Illustrator is 1.5 megabytes. Now, even though this is not the most dramatic difference in size, you will discover that as you add more and more layers and more effects to your Photoshop documents, that the size difference between the Photoshop document, which is the PSD, and the .ai, which is Adobe Illustrator, will become more noticeable. So in the long run, you could wind up with this file being several hundred megabytes, with this one being maybe 2 or 3 or 4 by the time you're done doing the same exact thing. Let's jump over to Illustrator now and look at this artwork. Once again, I have my trusty magnifying glass or zoom tool, and I'm going to zoom in on the same region. Do you see the difference? It's smooth. Illustrator uses vectors or paths to calculate where the points are going to draw a line. So we're not dealing with dots, we're dealing with paths. So Illustrator knows mathematically where all of the shapes are in relation to one another. This also helps to give you a much smaller file size. Let's jump back over to Photoshop again. When Photoshop has to keep track of these pixels, all of these dots, it has to keep track of the position, the color, and the relationship to the pixel next to it. And that's especially true when we apply special effects such as filters. So let's say we use the liquify filter or any of the blurring filters. The pixels are going to be pushed around. Photoshop has to keep track of that. Where this pixel used to be, where it is now, and what's happening with the pixels alongside of it. Whereas Illustrator files, well, Illustrator knows that this line is created by having a dot here and a point here and getting a curve from that. So when I grab the direct selection tool, we see we have points. So from here to here, the computer knows to calculate that curve. And from here to here to calculate this curve. There are no dots involved. And that is really my fake or pseudo-scientific explanation regarding the difference between vectors and rasters or pixels.